So check this out. I think I just built the most capable console of all time. It looks just like a standard audio board, but when I click this button, I have a dual screen Mac, and yes, the touchscreens actually work. Then this button, I have a video switcher with a multi-view. And now it's half and half. And would you believe this is still less than most of the other pro consoles out there? Meet the Peltz Expanded Console Mod, or PEX-C for short. Basically, I took an Allen Heath Avantis audio console, immediately voided the warranty by taking it apart and putting these extension cables on the DisplayPort and USB connections so that they are accessible on the outside of the console. That actually only takes a few minutes. The fun part was when I attached a KVM switch to those cables connected to the monitors, so that way I could change what was being routed to the screens and make it anything I want, including the original Advantis software. With the little finagling and trial and error, I got everything working and we were in business. I'll put affiliate links to all the gear, cables, and accessories I ended up using in the description below to save you all that time, and I'll explain the wiring at the end of this video. All right, so here's what I ended up with. We have, of course, the Advantis console in a really cool case that actually flips up. So it's compact, it gets through standard doors, all that. I ended up putting this little table on the front of it. You know, it moves back and forth like a tray, but it can come completely off. I end up storing that underneath the console in transport, and it allows me to get to everything under here. So real quick, I have an ATEM Extreme ISO right here. That's the SDI version, by the way, with 8 ins and 4 outs, and you'll see why I use 4 in a second. Then I have 2 different deck links and sonnet enclosures. This gives me 8 different outputs, or a combination of ins and outs. Let's say 2 inputs, 6 outputs, all for my Mac Studio over here. So my Mac Studio is actually running MadMapper, ATEM software, ProPresenter, really any software I want. And you could swap this out with a different Mac or a PC. I know a lot of people might want to use Mac Minis for something like this and have multiple in there. I opted for a Mac Studio Ultra just for the power. I didn't want any extra consoles if I could help it. If I need to, I can put Stream Decks, other MIDI controllers, things like that on this surface, but I was trying to have just one system that just works. So these buttons here allow me to switch between my Mac Studio as well as my ATEM system, and I can of course do half and half and go in between as I need. And the touchscreen functionality was big, that's going to work as I change between different inputs. I really wanted the touchscreen to work so that way I could bring up something like a camera on here, I could touch it, and I could move it around as I needed to. It just makes sense how it would work, that a touchscreen would allow you to move things around, and of course I can just hide them and get them away right here. So every single soft key fader knob is programmable through MIDI. That's how this is communicating. MIDI from the console to the Mac Studio via Companion. It sends triggers, MadMapper can accept it natively, and I can change my lighting cues, change up what the video wall is doing, all with soft keys that are programmable on the side. So that's the front of the console. Let's take a look at the back. So back here, it's really clean. I can have cables running in through the sides or just underneath. In the back, I have access to all of the I/O ports, which I wanted to keep. I still want to use this to run bands, have inputs and outputs at front of house, and then have a stage box over by the stage. But in the back, I want to be able to change, rewire whatever I needed for whatever gig. Power strip, I have a couple dongles and an Ethernet switch that is PoE capable. And then over here on the side, I have 2 different KVM switches with an IP to IR converter. So that's the system back here. Again, I can plug in whatever I need to. S-Link is probably the most important for the stage boxes, but I have all my ins and outs still up here, and it keeps it very clean and open. Lastly, let's talk about all these cables down here and where I plug them in. So down here under the rack, I have all this dead space. Now this can be very good for putting something like a backup battery down here, maybe a Goal Zero, and I could literally have this thing on wheels moving around for programming lights. But I have all my SDI connections for my deck links as well as my ATEM all down here. And in fact, I even have other connections for the monitors accessible down here as well. Again, if I need to rewire anything, I can. These are all labeled, so that way I don't have to constantly use the connectors up here and wear them out. I have nice extensions down here, and I can be changing and switching different ins and outs as I need to. I liked it because I could coil cables, put it here, and it wouldn't be tripping underneath my wheels. So that was a nice feature of having all this dead space underneath hidden and clean. And finally, I do have this little accessory drawer where I store a bunch of little ins and outs, router, some other little USB devices, stream decks, keyboard, mouse, perfect cue clicker, things like that. Good little storage bin. Once this closes and I lock everything in, there's no way for this console to move down. So I can lean on it. I could probably even stand on it if I wanted to. It is nice and strong. All right, so let's dive into the actual use cases for this guy. So standard audio board, that works. The way I'm getting these soft keys to actually change what my faders are doing is their scenes. So I stay on layer F for most of my show. I'm calling this my dynamic layer. I can easily change inputs to reach other different banks for my faders. But if I stay on F, then as I change to different sources for my screens, my faders will change with it because I programmed it that way. Even if I was on my Mac Studio here and I wanted to go back up to layer A and change maybe one of my microphones or something like that, I can still do that even though I'm on my Mac Studio. I still have access to audio even when I'm in video mode or lighting mode. I've set it up so when I go to my Mac Studio, I go over to my MIDI faders. So this is 1 through 24 of MIDI. When I go over to my ATEM, this stays on my 1 through 12 for audio, so this might be my microphones. Here is more MIDI faders if I wanted to program these to control my ATEM audio, or I could program them to control Mad Mapper layers, Pro Presenter, ins and outs. And again, all the soft keys are global. My soft keys are gonna stay controlling either my lights or my video system, whatever I want it to control, even though I'm on the audio page or the ATEM page, it's gonna go back to what I need it to do. My goal is not to run audio, video, lighting all at once. It's to have a lighting console, and when I need to, different gig, I can have a video console, and for a different gig, I can have an audio console without changing my pack, what's in the truck, all these different components. My workflow can stay the same. I really just wanted a Mad Mapper console. I was tired of having the audio guy and lighting guy have their really nice consoles, and the video was stuck with a cheap MIDI controller and kind of having to build their whole setup from scratch every time, plug a bunch of deck links and USB devices into each other to kind of get the setup you wanted. I wanted something that looked professional, you could flip up quickly and just get to work. Luckily, I do have a van with a ramp, so I'm not really concerned about weight, and is easy enough for 2 people to lift onto a stage deck, onto a riser for front of house. Flipping over to the Mac Studio here, currently I'm running the Mad Mapper software on my right screen, and I can just go ahead into live mode and click on different scenes here. So I like having that capability. I don't have to have everything programmed to a button, but I can have different scenes and cues up on Mad Mapper and expand that out. If I wanted to, I could even take something like this and I could expand it out onto my other screen, so I can have my scenes and cues up here while having different stuff on this side, or vice versa. So that's a nice perk of having all the different touch functionalities and options. On the left side currently, I have the ATEM software. I also have Pro Presenter running different playbacks of videos. Having the touchscreen, most of these softwares are touch friendly, which I've noticed. So I don't really need all these buttons programmed. I do have different buttons for different cameras up here, and you can see as I'm clicking these, they're switching what's happening on the ATEM. To program, to preview, I can run my T-bar just like this. I can run any software I want. If I plug in a PC, I can run all the Grand Amaze, Hog for PC, Sunlight Suite, CompuShow, all those different lighting softwares I can run on this machine and map all the MIDI faders to it. Same thing for all the different audio softwares. If I want to do a half and half with audio, I could have QLab or Shure Wireless Workbench or whatever I want up on this screen while running my Advantis software over here. And same for video. If I wanted to run vMix on a PC into this system, like Titler Live or MIDI, the great thing about this is because I have 3 separate systems all jammed into one, I can hand someone else an iPad or take the iPad myself and go run audio off the iPad controlling this system, even though someone else is using this to run lighting or video, taking over the screens. So it's very scalable and expandable with that. A very common use case I see for this particular system is having it control bigger racks of gear. So let's say I'm running audio, I would normally have a rack of microphones, maybe backstage or right next to me. These could be Axients, QLXDs, ULXDs, but I'll have microphones in a rack plugged into the system. And then I could pull up the Mac Studio and I could pull up Wireless Workbench to control those mics. Same thing for running video. I might have an ATEM and I want to have a constellation over on the side with hyperdecks, web presenters, a whole bunch of other inputs and outputs, and I could route the multi-views to this, so then I could run my playback software and I could be controlling the ATEM as well on this screen. So having a multi-view, control, playback all on one console, and I could even be controlling the audio of those playback devices from here. So that's a use case, is for this thing to really be controlling other racks, including ArtNet nodes for lighting. So I might have a rack with an ArtNet node in it. I might have other ArtNet nodes spread throughout the trussing or backstage, and this is just hooked up into that to get signal to my lights. And yes, technically you can do this with a bunch of different consoles, like a Yamaha DM7 or a Midas. Anything with a screen and MIDI faders, you could rewire and do this build turn into a lighting or video console, not just for audio. So let's talk about pricing real quick. The Advantis, about $15,000. The Mac Studio Ultra in this guy, $4,000. 2 Sonnet enclosures with Decklink Duos, that's about $1,600 for all of that. The ATEM SDI Extreme ISO in here, about $1,500. All the accessories, KVMs, power strips, cables, things like that, about $1,000. The case itself was $3,000. So we're looking at about $27,000 for this whole rig right here. That may sound like a lot, but when you put it up against other consoles that can do only a portion of what this thing can do, for instance, a Grand MA Compact is going to run you about $40,000 brand new. A Grand MA Lite is going to run you about $60,000, and those both have dual screens with faders. But I remind you, that only does lighting. It can't do video and it can't do audio. A Yamaha DM7, which is a better audio board than this guy. It can do 120 channels. This thing can only do 64 channels. But that right there is $30,000, which is more than this. And again, it can only do audio. It can't do lighting or video. And there aren't many video consoles in this form factor that kind of look and do this type of thing. Although the Pixel Hue U5, which is about $35,000, does have an ultra-wide touchscreen, lots of buttons and faders. But again, that doesn't run your lighting and that doesn't run your audio. This does all 3, and it's less than any one of those devices. You add up all 3 of those devices and you could be looking at $100,000. I'm not saying this is a better board or better system than any of those. I'm just saying this has more functionality because those are limited to what they were built for. So who might want something like this? Well, if you are a one-man band a lot and you try to run audio, video, and lighting, you would like this a lot. Maybe you're just an audio guy and you like the Advantis console and you want to be able to run a computer to run your QLab or Wireless Workbench or other softwares from the console because you don't want to have other computers and things like this. This would do a lot for you. And honestly, it's pretty easy to do this mod.
Maybe you're a nightclub or an install gig, and a lot of times you only have one person running your whole system. You could have devices in different locations, computers and racks in the back, and be able to control everything from this one system instead of having a very large table and having to run back and forth constantly. And again, I am not advising that one person should run all three all the time, but if you're already doing that, I think I've made my point. And a perfect example of this thing is I'm currently running wireless video right here to that video wall. And this thing has no cables coming out of it. It's completely battery powered with my Gold Zero underneath. And I could wheel it around. So if I need to wheel this over here to projection map the wall, I can do that. To maybe program lights or the video wall over here. And then I could roll back all the way to front of house and run my system. So a very compact setup, everything's in here. And if I need to, I could even take a laptop, remote into the Mac Studio in here, and go run the laptop from stage or wherever I need to do my programming, then come back to my system at front of house. Or this could be behind the wall, it could be behind a big system, and I could wheel it out when I need it and put it back when I don't.
Let's talk about how PEX-C is wired. The main workhorse is a Mac Studio Ultra that has two deck links connected to it via Sonnet enclosures. That Mac has two monitor outs which run into an ATEM Extreme SDI ISO. I had to convert the HDMI outs from the Mac to SDI to get them into the video switcher. The motherboard from the Advantis does the same thing. DisplayPort out to HDMI, then convert HDMI to SDI to go into the video switcher. I put the Mac on inputs 5 and 6, while the Advantis is on inputs 7 and 8. This way, I had the first 4 inputs open for cameras, other computers, etc. Then I took outputs 3 and 4 from the ATEM Extreme SDI ISO into the Advantis monitors. SDI to HDMI, then HDMI back to DisplayPort. I left SDI outputs 1 and 2 open so I could use them for other external displays, plugging into projectors or conference monitors or anything else that I needed. I went with the ATEM over a traditional KVM for a bunch of reasons. Extra ins and outs, more versatile routing, faster and cleaner switching between inputs and outputs, controllability, ISO recording all 8 feeds for later use, multi-view options, you get the idea. But the one downside is it can't handle USB switching for the touchscreen functionality of the monitors, so I had to solve that a different way. Finding these somewhat cheap little KVMs was the perfect solution. I didn't care about the video signal since that was being handled by the ATEM switcher, so I just needed clean USB switching that I could control from the computer instead of from physical buttons. These took in IR control, and as that wasn't ideal, it was something I had a solution for. The IP to IR converter box can control up to 3 different devices and comes with little extenders that I can place and stick directly on top of the IR receivers on the KVM. So there is no way for them to miss a signal when I send it. Then I programmed the IP to IR converter from the KVM supplied remotes and finally start sending it TCP signals from BitFocus Companion. An 8-port Ethernet switch allows all the devices to communicate with each other over a local network, all with static IPs so we don't have any network issues, and I am using BitFocus Companion to send signals to all the various devices, and it is even taking input commands from the Allen Heath via MIDI. So when I push a soft key on the Advantis, it has been set up to send a MIDI command via Ethernet to my local network. Companion sees that MIDI command has been sent and triggers a couple of actions based on that command. It tells the ATEM which video source to send out of outputs 3 and 4, the Advantis monitors, and tells the IP to IR converter to switch the 2 KVMs to their respective USB sources. Finally, it sends the last command back to the Advantis console via MIDI to change which scene it should be on. These scenes change the physical fader assignments on layer F. Even if my Mac or video switcher or one of the KVMs goes down, I can still use my system, built-in backups. I wired the video going in and out of the Advantis monitors through a single bidirectional HDMI SDI converter, so if the ATEM switcher were to power off or restart for any reason, the converter would default to doing an HDMI loop through instead of bidirectionally converting. So I would still have my audio Advantis software on the screens even if my ATEM goes down. Having two separate KVMs also means if one goes down, the other one still works, so at least I will have touch control on one of the screens at all times. Again, always thinking about backups and single points of failure.
And don't get me wrong, there are a lot of cons about this setup right here. For instance, this is a full 1080p workflow, and that's by choice. These monitors are only 1080p. They're not very color accurate. I don't have a very large video switcher in here. And yes, there is a single point of failure, which is the power for this Advantis. If that goes down, my Mac Studio is still running, my ATEM switcher is still running. Technically, nothing besides the audio itself would actually go down, although I wouldn't be able to control them very easily unless I had my extra monitors and stuff on the side. So there are single points of failure in here, even though I tried to compensate for that. Because I built this, I know how it's wired. I can troubleshoot on site and solve whatever problems I'm running into. I keep some extra cables with me. I can unplug, replug, power cycle things like we would do for any troubleshooting issue. So that's the whole system, guys. This is PEX-C. Thanks for watching. If you guys have questions or comments, feel free to put them down in the chat below, and I'm gonna put all the links to everything in this build in the description below. Again, thanks for watching. Have a good one.